The Rebel Capitalist Show.
When I was reading the Fed's website, they were saying that when they are the counterparty in a reverse repo, the T-bills or whatever collateral they give in that reverse repo transaction stays on their balance sheet.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, well, how can it stay on their balance sheet, but yet it goes on to someone else's balance sheet? And let's just say that it was a term repo. I don't know if they're doing that in reverse repo as a counterparty if it's all overnight, but let's say if it was term.
No, they do have terms, but they don't happen very often.
Okay, but if it was a term, then the money market fund or whatever could lend that out, and it could go to five different people on their, but the Fed still has it on their balance sheet.
That can't happen. You can't reuse or repledge Fed collateral.
Oh, okay.
So that's one of the reasons why when we're looking at the reverse repo usage, it's usually money market funds who can't find collateralized counterparties in the other markets. It's not like dealers are going in and saying, I'm going to grab some of the SOMA and start rehypothecating it. You're only going to use the reverse repo if sort of is the last kind of collateral resort because there's no place else to do it.
So that's why 95% of the participants are money market funds. And because not primary dealer banks,
right. The Federal Reserve actually has a securities lending window where you can theoretically go to the Fed and rent collateral from them, but that never really gets used. I mean, I think it's up to about 40 billion or so, which in the grand scheme of things is a drop in the bucket, and it hasn't really risen all that much. I mean, it used to be around 30 and 20 in years past, so it's gone up. But theoretically, you can go and rent collateral if you're short of collateral from the Fed. But again, there are restrictions and prohibitions on it there too. And dealers really don't like doing that. It's really, if you're synthetically short collateral in the marketplace, you're kind of left to the whims of the marketplace. There really isn't a lot of places to go. So again, when we see the reverse repo go up, it's not like that's a solution to the collateral problem. It's a symptom of it. And it's a symptom of it that's sort of, in my mind, useless. It's sort of like, okay, money market funds are shifting, leaving the original collateral problem unsolved, undealt with, and largely unappreciated because nobody really understands the RRP to begin with.
Yeah, and when the Fed's buying bills, it really exacerbates the problem because before I understood about the collateral multiplier, I was assuming, okay, well, the Fed buys bills, and if they can, if the market can still access them via reverse repo, well, then it's the collateral still getting back out into the system, but really it's not, because it's going it's going back into the system with a multiplier of 1 instead of a multiplier of 30, and that's those two T-bills are way different.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, George, the Fed knows about. I mean, the Fed, you got to go back to October of 2019. After the repo mess, the Fed said, well, we're going to clean it up by raising the level of bank reserves, but we don't want to call it quantitative easing, so we're only going to buy Treasury bills. And at that time, I said that was the worst possible thing they could do because they're taking Treasury bills out of circulation, which is the best of the best. And of course, it turned out that was exactly the problem. But in March, the week of March 18th, right in the thick of the crisis last year, the Fed stopped buying Treasury bills. They realized, oh, we screwed up here. And ever since that point, actually, they bought a little bit more the next week, I think a couple billion more. But ever since the week, I think it was March 25th or 26th of 2020, the Fed's SOMA holdings of T-bills has been exactly the same.
Yeah.
They've reinvested, but they haven't bought any more, which, I mean, again, if you just have the standard bank reserve view of things, this doesn't really make much sense and you don't know how to interpret it. But what it really is the Fed saying, oh, my God, we screwed up big here. We have a crisis where everybody's getting herded into Treasury bills, and we've been removing hundreds of billions of Treasury bills from circulation. Things got so bad, the thick of the crisis, we're just going to stop buying Treasury bills and not tell anybody. We're not going to make a big deal out of it. We're just going to stop. And they haven't bought a single more bill. They've just reinvested ever since then.
But if they sell it, then if you're getting it from someone else, then you can go ahead and the multipliers, whatever the market.
The private market, yes, depending on the arrangement in which you obtain the Treasury bill. If you bought it outright, then obviously you can do whatever you want with it.
Right.
If you got it from a hedge fund client in a custodial prime brokerage relationship, you probably have the right to do something with it.
But once the Fed sells it, then it can be multiplied, whatever the multiplier that the market's
attaching relinquished title.
To it. Yeah,
That's one of the stupid parts about all this is you have to actually say, when you buy a treasury bill, are you actually buying a treasury bill? Because, reuse and rehypothecation in many ways looks like a purchase agreement. I mean, it's even called a repurchase agreement, when in fact there's no transfer of title there.
Yeah,
and that's really what the Fed is saying when it says, when I engage in these reverse repos, I leave these securities on our balance sheet because we're not relinquishing title. What we're really relinquishing is narrow rights that if we default on the cash borrowing, like, to the money market fund lent us cash, they have the right to seize those securities and sell them.
Why don't they just do like an Operation Twist?
Who, the Fed?
Yeah, where they just buy more long term and then sell those bills without reducing the size of their balance sheet. So to get those bills back out in the system.
Because I don't think, again, there's an appreciation that they screwed up, but there's no real appreciation for the wider implication of all this. And even now, it's, there's 326 billion, I think, in the Soma of bills in the Soma portfolio, like, which is not a whole lot to sell.
Yeah, right. In the grand scheme of things, right.
Right. So, I mean, they could sell 300 billion and maybe they'd be done in a month. And then what?
What do you think would happen if they just sold everything?
All the bills or all the bonds?
It just did QT, brought their balance sheet down to 800 billion. So all that collateral was back. I know the best is the T-bills, but still you're taking all that collateral and pushing it back out into the system. Do you think the market would panic just because they've got that Pavlovian QE thing where the market would tank and just the whole economy would collapse because of how dramatic that would be? Or do you think the opposite would happen and that we'd be off to the races because we'd have all this additional collateral that was being tied up by the Fed? Or would that multiplier reduce because of all the increased risk in the system because the stock market go down? I mean, I guess there's a lot of different variables there.
There's a lot of, I mean, but we had this situation in 2017, right?
Well, they did QT,
the stock market loved it. Quantitative tightening was to the stock market catnip, because it was the Fed saying, we're so confident that this globally synchronized growth stuff is real, we're actually going to shrink our balance sheet. And stocks, okay, everything's awesome. We're bid. The bond market was a little more skeptical, not of quantitative tightening, but of globally synchronized growth. So it didn't matter that more collateral came into the system. You look at 2018, it was a collateral mess. Even though the Fed was less of a buyer in less of a hoarder in the collateral system, the collateral multiplier must have shrank anyway because 2018 was not inflationary. It turned out to be deflationary, and we had all sorts of collateral indications along the way. So it's not, I mean, it's difficult to say what a future QT might look like. It really depends on the circumstances that they undertake the QT in. But I think initially, the Fed does anything, the market always receives it as, in the short run, as, oh, this is great, it's the Fed. And that's what we really need to break everyone from, is the habit of thinking everything goes through monetary policy and the SOMA and QE and the Federal Reserve, when in fact, it's all the important stuff takes place in places you can't see and observe, except by indirectly observing what's going on in the T-bill market, for example, or long-term or Eurodollar futures, or basis swap trades and things like that. You have to look at what the market is telling you, not what the Fed is doing.
Yeah, I think you said it on one of our interviews where I asked you how you would determine if the system had been fixed, or maybe if the education level with the public or the financial media had gotten to the point where we can fix the system. And I think you said it's when no one knows the name of the Fed chair.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, just a simple example. Most people believe don't fight the Fed, but yet you look at the bond market. The bond market's been fighting the Fed for a long time. I mean, Alan Greenspan's conundrum was 2005. So the bond market knows that what the Fed really is. The Fed is nothing more than an emperor with no clothes. And it's not even an emperor. It's just a naked guy running around claiming to be an emperor. So the bond market knows don't fight the Fed is garbage. But yet the vast majority of the public thinks, don't fight the Fed. The Fed is a central bank. The Fed is the most powerful entity ever conceived, right? And it's that disconnect that creates all this confusion, because the bond market is acting as if the Fed doesn't matter, because it doesn't. We don't know how to interpret it because we believe the Fed does. And so we have to run everything, all of our mainstream worldview, through bank reserves and the Federal Reserve. And it just leads to utter chaos and confusion because the world doesn't work that way.
Yeah. Well, at the same time, literally every single time they've done QE, interest rates have gone up.
Yes.
The exact, I mean, if you look at I did a video the other day using a clip from the Bank of England's YouTube video where they explained the intention of quantitative easing, and they said it's to basically bring down rates at the long end of the curve. So
It
you
never
bring
has.
down, it's done the opposite. Even this
Right.
last round when they went up to 120 billion, you call it QE infinity. Rates are, I think, when they started that, when they announced that, the
They were low.
10-year was right about right about 50 basis points,
Yep.
I think, something like that. And now, although it's come down significantly recently, it's still at 120 or 130 basis points. So it's just bizarre, the complete opposite. And I don't want to take up too much of your time, but that's when I think of yield curve control, and I'm like, well, how maybe they can't do yield curve control if inflation got out of hand, because every single basically QE is yield curve control to a certain degree. I know it's not identical, because
you look at the first QE1, for example. You're exactly right. Yields started to rise as soon as QE1 was announced in December 2008. They went up. Yeah. They went up the entire time the Fed was buying U.S. Treasuries during QE1. So their bond buying had no effect on interest rates, because it's the market that controls
inverse effect.
And the market said, this bond buying, maybe it will work. Maybe QE will work and growth and inflation will be the result. But it didn't last very long. And that's the key point. The market says this in QE2, same thing. QE2 comes around, the yields start to rise again, but they only rose for a couple months. And the reason they only rose for a couple months was they gave Ben Bernanke the benefit of the doubt. Maybe this stuff will work. Then after a couple months, it was clear it's not working. And then the yields sink again. And it's the market that controls yields. And by the way, the central banks know this. If you read the studies that they publish, what they'll say is, well, we lower term premiums, or we might lower rates a little bit more than they already have been lowered. And when you think about it that way, how did they get low to begin with if it wasn't QE? It's the market saying things are so bad, growth and inflation, or the potential for both of those are coming down so far, it makes sense for yields to go down and down and down, which is entirely consistent with Milton Friedman's interest rate fallacy, which always says low rates signal tight money, high rates loose money. If you see low rates persist, it tells you QE hasn't been money printing. There is no reflationary potential in the economy. It's exactly the opposite.
But not just the global economy.
The global system.
We got to insert that.
That's the thing that he missed in the 1990s. Friedman did, was that the system we had a global system by then, and that's another complication on top of the mistaken worldview that runs everything through the central bank and Federal Reserve. We have a global system, a global monetary system. The banking system knows it. The monetary system knows what goes on, even if it doesn't hit the pages of Bloomberg or the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah.